Hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining today. I'll start in just a couple minutes because we've got maybe 7 or 8 more people signed up who are not here yet. But while we're waiting, I'd love if you could all just type into the chat box who you are and what it was that brought you here today. Okay, great. Seeing a few of you already saying here to learn, here to help support clients. Yeah, that's really important right now. It's quite hard, isn't it, during these wild times? And okay, good. We've got some people living in Prague. That's where I am. All right, perfect. So I'm hoping that all of the technology works out in terms of sharing my screen and managing all of this. So let me reshare my screen with you. I made some nice slides, so got to use those. Okay, perfect. All right, so I asked, when you signed up, I asked how much do you know about emotional intelligence? And some of you said nothing, and some of you said you've got quite a lot of knowledge about it already. So this will be a bit of a mixed bag. Some of you might hear a lot of stuff you already know. Some of you might hear completely new stuff, and it might be too neuroscientific at points. I try to kind of keep it at a place where there's something for everyone. But yeah, okay, so let me just introduce myself. I can see a few people here that I know, but for the rest of you, I'm Gwyneth Jones, and yeah, I live in Prague in the Czech Republic, but I'm from the UK originally. And yeah, I'm a coach, mostly helping people to reconnect with themselves, with each other, and with nature, because I think, these are really important aspects of connection to focus on, especially for the crazy world that we're living in at the moment. And I'm not just talking about COVID-19, although obviously that's the crisis that is on everybody's minds at the moment, but I'm talking about economic instability, climate collapse, and especially one of the things that I normally focus on is helping people to deal with what's now called eco-anxiety. So helping people to deal with, the feelings of overwhelm about what's happening to the planet, and that ties into all these feelings of uncertainty about the future that are really hard to deal with. So I trained as a coach, originally about 8 years ago, but last year I trained with 6 Seconds, which is the emotional intelligence network. And so the speciality there was to work with emotional intelligence. And, there's an assessment that is quite powerful that's used for people to see a graph of how they're doing in terms of emotional intelligence. And there are lots of techniques to help people really master their EQ, emotional intelligence. My other background is just psychology. So I studied psychology at university, master's in applied positive psychology. So bringing all that together, it's really looking at, how do we create a better world? How do we create more resilient, connected, flourishing societies, even when, all these uncertainties are coming for us? So I am going to just let you know what you can expect this evening. So yeah, we'll just go over what is emotional intelligence for those of you who don't know. And yeah, I want to really look at understanding different emotions. So fear, sadness, and anger. We're going to go a bit into the science of how your body responds to threat, why it's so important to recognize how we're feeling. Sorry, I'm just admitting more people into the room. And yeah, why it's so important to be kind to ourselves and to really accept or embrace uncertainty. And we'll look as well at how we might generate useful emotions in the body. And I say useful because sometimes emotions that don't feel good are still useful, right? Because it's nice to be happy all the time, but it isn't always helpful to be happy all the time. For example, if you are genuinely in danger, that's a time when fear is actually quite useful. So yeah, and I'm also gonna slip in a few grounding meditations to help with this. So, I'm always trying to balance science and spirituality, which is where I think meditation kind of brings the two together. There's a lot of, research showing the benefits of meditation on regulating our mood and being aware of our emotions. So, with that in mind, let's start with a grounding breath. So, okay, I want everybody to close their eyes and just take a really deep breath. And if you're sitting on a chair, I want you to just really notice the feeling of your feet on the ground. Feel the chair supporting your weight, and just focus on all the points where the chair is meeting your body. And if not a chair, if it's your bed, if it's the floor, the same thing. So just feel your weight being supported by whatever you're on. And just notice the feeling of the breath entering into your lungs and feel it leaving your body. And just take 3 really deep breaths here. Okay, and with your eyes still closed, I want you to say to yourself, right now, at this second, I'm safe. Maybe if you say it out loud to yourself, right now, at this second, I'm safe. And then just listen for a moment to all the sounds that you can hear around you. You can hear me. Maybe you can hear something else in the background. Just take a few moments to listen to all those different layers of sounds that are around you. And now back to just listening to the sound of your breath. And focusing again on the feeling of the ground or the chair or the bed supporting your weight. And one more time, say to yourself right now, at this second, I'm safe. Okay, and then gently just start to move your toes and fingers a bit to remind yourself of where you are. And when you're ready, open your eyes again. Okay, so I also feel calmer now. In an emotional intelligence sense, I could say running a webinar gets my heart racing a bit with, nervousness, and then this breath helps me to feel a bit more relaxed. So I'm gonna try something that I haven't done before, but Zoom lets us do, which is to put you in breakout rooms. So this means you're actually going to talk a little bit to each other. I'm going to put you into rooms of 3 or 4 people, and you'll have 5 minutes to introduce yourself briefly. And I want you to ask each other this question and see if you're able to answer it. What are emotions? And if you manage to come up with a definition of emotions pretty quickly, how many can you list? And I want one person in each group to take that role on that they're going to write down as many emotions as your group's able to list. Okay, so quick introduction. What are emotions? How many can you list? So I'm going to put you into groups of 3 or 4. You'll be taken out of this chat for a few minutes. So you'll want to unmute yourself and show your camera, and then you'll get a notification about a minute before you get pulled back into this room. So the reason I asked you to start listing emotions, we'll see a bit later on, but there's a lot of research showing that, one of the paths to emotional intelligence is just being able to name a lot of different emotions. So it's that fine tuning between, oh, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling bad, versus I'm feeling excited, I'm feeling a little bit of anticipation, I'm feeling, scared, versus I'm feeling nervous, or being able to look at that whole color wheel when you're choosing colors instead of just kind of black and white, or even just red, yellow, and blue and green. So the more we're able to fine tune what we see, what we perceive, the better. Okay, great. So yeah, what are emotions? Well, we all have them, right? We all know what they are, but it's hard to answer that on the spot. If you imagine that an alien from outer space was trying to find out what exactly these things are. So yeah, I mean, they're sensations, right? They're sensations in our body that tell us something. So the word emotion apparently actually comes from Latin, moter, which, the word motor also, or motivation, these words are all connected to movement. And this suffix e or e on the end apparently means to move away from something. So we can see from that emotions were actually, that impulse in the body that makes us act. And you can see that when you watch an animal, right? Like an emotion such as fear, it makes them do something. It makes them run away or attack or hide or roll over on their back. Or even if you're, spending time with a child, you can see that when they feel an emotion, they definitely do something. They cry, or they break something, or they really display their emotions, right? It's just that in our civilized adult world, we're not always encouraged to act when we feel an emotion. And so it might be that we feel something internally, but we don't act. And we can also, talk a bit later about what is the effect of that on us if we're feeling anxiety, stress, fear, anger, but we're just forcing ourselves to sit still and to look as if everything's fine. What is the effect of that? Yeah, so Alena then mentioned the difference between an emotion and a feeling. Yeah, we could say that the emotions that first initial response that you feel when something happens. The feeling is the longer term, right? So you might feel a flash of anger when somebody says something to you that you don't like. But if you continue to think about it and ruminate on it and carry on the conversation, it might turn into a longer feeling of anger. And if that carries on more, it can just become a bad mood. And maybe if that carries on even more, it can become a bad personality trait where you're always angry. So, yeah. So, one of the key things that we talk about in emotional intelligence is, to compare these ideas of the emotional brain and the rational brain. And I'm sure you've heard some different version of this. There are loads and loads of people out there using the same idea but with different labels. So we can talk about the thinking and the feeling brain, for example. If you've read Yuval Noah Harari, Sapiens, he talks about the experiencing self and the narrating self. And this, for example, is the narrating self. Your thinking brain has an idea like, yeah, I'm going to get up early every morning and start exercising because that's good for me. But the feeling brain is the one that hits the snooze button because it just wants to stay in bed. And it's like, nah, I don't want to do that. I want to stay in bed, maybe eat some ice cream. So, if we were acting purely based on reason and rational thinking, then it would be easy, right, to eat healthily and exercise and quit smoking and do all these things we know are good for us. But there's this emotional brain that maybe has other ideas. It's also sometimes called System 1 and System 2. If anyone's read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, for example, or there's this nice illustration that I like of the elephant and the rider. So the idea is, that the rider, the conscious or thinking brain, the rational brain, thinks that they're in charge of the elephant, but once the elephant is actually scared, something happens on the path to frighten it, the rider's going to find out very quickly that they're not really in control, that they're just kind of hanging on for dear life. So, yeah, of course, we don't really have two brains, but we do have different, systems that work within our brains, sometimes in harmony, sometimes not. And we're going to look more a little bit at what are those two brains really, and how do we maybe integrate them a bit more. So yeah, emotional intelligence, what is it? I mean, I think you all have a pretty good idea having signed up to this, but we can say it's being smart about feelings in a really, really basic way, understanding that emotions are data. So a lot of people maybe grew up with messages like you should ignore your emotions, or emotions are childish, and you should leave your emotions at the door when you come to work and act professionally. But at the same time, a manager who ignores the emotions of his employees is missing a lot of important data, right? Because if you're wondering, for example, why do all my staff keep leaving, and you're just looking at hard rational facts like, oh, but their salary is good, they have benefits, and you're missing a key piece of information like, they're all feeling really undervalued and upset because of you, maybe because of something else that's happening in the workplace. So when people go into organizations and do emotional intelligence coaching, this is the key message, that you're missing really important data. And at least that's the language for the rational minded people, right? This is important information. On the other hand, if you want to look at it from a more spiritual perspective, it's living in a way that's more aligned and integrated with yourself. Because if you cut off your emotions, if you ignore them, then you're gonna sooner or later find that those emotions come back and catch up with you in the form of maybe psychosomatic symptoms of sickness or panic attacks, or just feeling like something's really wrong. So it's understanding that emotions are important, firstly, And, there's this nice quote that I like that emotional intelligence is the capacity to blend thinking and feeling, etc. And yeah, if we're to break it down into what it really looks like, it's being able to understand, use, and manage your own emotions. So the first stage is kind of understanding what's going on, understanding, how am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling like this? How can I maybe feel a different way? But it's not just about really knowing ourselves really well, it's also about how we show up in the world. So emotional intelligence also gives you a really strong idea of what other people are thinking and feeling and why. And it's not in some creepy way of let's manipulate people and read their minds, but in a way of being empathic and being able to maybe communicate powerfully, diffuse conflict, and really understand why people are behaving in a certain way. And right now in this whole COVID crisis, right, this is a really, really important skill to have. And I just released an article about an hour before this webinar that I spent the day writing about why emotional intelligence is so important right now. Because, because if you are not really aware of what's going on in yourself, then you're very likely to get taken over by fear or panic or anxiety, and you might act in a way that you would later regret because you were caught up in that fight or flight response. It also helps us to understand why other people are behaving the way they do, because I know a lot of people right now are looking at social media, looking at the news and thinking, oh my God, why aren't people staying home? Why are they being so selfish? Why are they being so disrespectful? And hopefully EQ can help us regulate our own response to that, but also to have some empathy for why maybe people are behaving in these ways that we don't understand. Yeah. And I think it's also a really important thing right now for us to avoid being manipulated, because the media sells by playing with our emotions. It sells by kicking our flight or fight response into action, right? Or our anger. It's the things that we feel the strongest emotional reaction to that we're most likely to share or to click on. And I think the more we work on our own EQ, the less we're likely to, just be constantly thrown around by this ocean of other people's will and desires, whether it's marketers, politicians, or media. So yeah, anyway, I think it's a very important thing. Plus all these nice things, people with higher EQ, according to a lot of research, have stronger, better relationships, more success, school and work, and they're mentally and physically healthier. So again, really great stuff for these times we find ourselves in, right? So yeah, okay. So I'm just gonna say for today, I'm just gonna cover these three main aspects of EQ. There are a lot more really, but recognizing our emotions, understanding where they come from, and why they're useful, maybe why they're here, and finding ways to counter our stress response. And I say change our mood. I mean, I know that this can sound a bit weird, like you're trying to numb the pain, you're trying to distract yourself, you're trying to pretend everything's fine. I always say that is kind of what you're doing, but it's not the main goal. It's more like, is this emotion actually helpful right now? So if you're feeling anxiety and panic because you're actually in a threatening situation right now, then of course you don't want to go, okay, I'm just gonna go here and do some yoga. So sometimes these emotions are actually helpful, but at the same time, if you're getting like overwhelmed with anxiety and panic because you are scrolling through Facebook and you see some stories that make you start to worry, it's maybe not the most helpful, useful emotion for you, right? So okay, so here we have a lady being very, very scared by this cute little mouse. So what we mentioned before, emotion being a response to a stimulus. And in this particular example, that's quite clear. So there's a thing in the outside world and it's caused an emotion, right? I put a mouse because I thought maybe if I put a spider or a snake, people here will actually start to feel that anxiety. Hopefully this cute little mouse won't do that. But yeah, so my question looking at this first is, how do you know when you feel fear? So how does it feel in the body? And I want you to, again, type that into your chat for a moment. How do you know when you're feeling fear? What does it feel like in the body? So I'll wait for a few people to type something for me. Okay, so we have a few different things. So tight chest, alertness, feeling cold, shaking, fast and strong heartbeat, fast breathing, different heart rate, stomach troubles. So we all know, or we all have a kind of indicator, right? Of, oh, okay, I'm feeling fear. And as we've said, that's because emotions are physical things happening in our body. Okay, now, what do you think is the purpose of this emotion? So, you know, if we think back thousands and thousands of years to our ancestors, why would they have evolved to feel fear? So, what is the purpose of fear? And again, I'm going to make you type that in your chat box as well. Why do you think we feel fear? Yeah, so fight or flight readiness, to protect us from a threat, to protect ourselves. Yeah, so the word protect, protect, protect is coming up a lot here, right? Yeah, we've got the more technical explanation here from Maria to activate the nervous system of the body to enable it to react very fast. Yeah, so we've got this idea of what is fear, how do I know when I'm feeling it, and why do I have it? Okay, so what about the other emotions? So I won't make you type this out, but I just want you to think for a moment about some of the other emotions that you might have. You know, how do you recognize it again in your body? What's the physical sensation? And why do you think that we evolved that? So just take a minute there to think about it. You can close your eyes for a moment. Okay, does anyone want to unmute themselves and share with us a particular feeling they were thinking about?
I was surprised on hearing sounds, and then I was intrigued on not hearing anything.
And how do you know when you're feeling surprised? What happens in your body?
I don't know. It's like a jumpy feeling. It's like, oh, I don't know. It's light feeling. It's like, ah.
Okay. And why do you think we would have evolved that reaction?
Good question.
I've got
also be alert, right? Just to be alert, because it's something new. So it could be good or it could be dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. If you think about the facial response to surprise, right? Usually our eyes widen. So we're like getting a better look at the new thing. So we're trying to see it more closely because it's new stimulus for us. Yeah, that's what they say about surprise, at least. Yeah. Okay, so does anyone else want to share an emotion they thought about?
So I thought about love as a positive emotion, but realized it's about bonding, and that goes back to protection as well.
Oh, yeah, great. Okay. So can you tell us, how does love feel in your body? How do you know when you're feeling that?
Well, that's instead of being alert, it's the opposite. It's like you're
Mm.
relaxed and you feel safe and protected and warm and it's a very positive emotion, but you feel, you know, as part of a group, so to speak, or even
Mm.
if it's just a couple, and it's safer and you're protected.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely. Okay, wonderful. Well, I've got a few emotions here that I'll share with you. Now, the slides here are all taken from the book Emotional Intelligence. So just to say, these are not my exact words, but yeah. So some of the more common emotions. Here we've got anger as an example, right? And yeah, this is typically how we know that we're feeling angry, that blood flows to our hands. So it's thought to be maybe that we're getting ready to attack, to grab a weapon, or to strike at a foe. And yeah, so we feel usually, right, our heart rate is increasing. There's this rush of hormones, adrenaline pushes us into action. So we would have felt anger maybe when we needed to fight or to attack. So if we think now about how we feel when we feel angry, for me, it's definitely this heat flushing into my face, and you feel, heartbeat starts to increase, and definitely our body would be getting ready to do something, right? To attack or something like that. Yeah. And fear, yeah, we talked about a bit there with the mouse, but here we go. So blood makes it basically easier for us to run away. So this is one reason that sometimes we go cold. Someone said they're feeling cold when they're afraid, right? The blood is rushing down to our legs so that we can run away more effectively. And then when we talk about that fight or flight response, there's also the freeze response. So when we feel fear, I'm sure you've had that, moment when you're like, a deer in headlights, right? You freeze in fear. So this is maybe our body is deciding, okay, do I need to run away? Do I need to attack? Do I just need to play dead? What do I do? And yeah, we become more alert again. So as we've said, this would have been very useful to protect us, and it's still very useful to protect us now, right? And if we think about the coronavirus situation, in a way, the media and the governments were kind of, I think, using emotional intelligence that are to their advantage, because if you want the whole population to stay indoors and self quarantine and not to spread a disease, if you just say, hey, can you please stay home, we saw what happens. But if you actually make people really afraid, if you're like, oh my god, this disease is so bad and you're all gonna die, then people get really afraid. And so their brain is like, okay, I have to protect myself, I have to protect my loved ones. And so kind of in that way, using our fear to make us do what was best for society, rather than just appealing to our sense of goodwill, which did work for some people, but clearly not for everybody. Yeah. Disgust. If you if you're wondering who these characters are, the movie Inside Out is a great Disney Pixar movie about emotional intelligence. So yeah, if you think about when you're disgusted, that face, that the nose wrinkles, we're almost like closing our nostrils from what could be a noxious odor, or trying to spit out a poisonous food, right? So disgust is really that reaction of get that thing away from me. And oh, just a moment, I have to add somebody back into the chat. Okay, and sadness, yeah. So again, even sadness is thought to have an evolutionary advantage, right? So when we've experienced some kind of loss, especially sadness, makes us retreat into ourselves. It makes us maybe stay home, not use up our energy. So if you read this, it says sadness brings a drop in energy and in enthusiasm for life's activities, especially diversions and pleasures. And as it deepens, I should say, sorry, as it gets closer to depression, it actually slows the body's metabolism as well. So this kind of, this introspective withdrawal creates the opportunity to mourn a loss or frustrated hope, to think about the consequences for one's life, and as energy returns, to plan new beginnings. So I thought this bit was really, poignant, right? This loss of energy may well have kept saddened and vulnerable early humans close to home where they were safer. So basically, we're seeing the theme of safety, 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 right? Emotions are our body trying to keep us safe in different ways. So sometimes it would have been safe for us to just stay home, conserve energy. And, I've also read these things that, when a loved one is sad, we feel, right, we want to protect them, we want to look after them. So it's almost a way to bring your society around you as well. And we've got a nice one, love, as Kelly was saying there. So while a lot of these anxiety and anger and fear trigger our sympathetic nervous system, love triggers the opposite one, the parasympathetic, which is the one that slows down the heart rate, slows down the pulse, and basically tells us that we're safe. Yeah, so relaxation response that generates a general state of calm and contentment, facilitating cooperation. So again, if we even think about our ancestors way back, if they were feeling safe and feeling love, then that tells you you're in a safe place right now, you're protected, so this is good, stay here. Right? And the same ideas with happiness, it's telling us like, yes, this is the thing to do, keep doing that, and I will reward you with nice fuzzy feelings. So if we think about how there are these emotions that do trigger the sympathetic nervous system, like anxiety, anger, fear, and these others that trigger the parasympathetic nervous system, and they're basically the opposites, right? So sympathetic nervous system is speeding up your heartbeat, your blood pressure. Parasympathetic's doing the opposite. It's calming them down, it's slowing them down. We can start to think about not only what are these emotions and why do we have them, but which emotions would be good to tap into and generate when I need to feel a certain way. So so these are all from the father of emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman. This was the first book really that came out in 1995 and really brought emotional intelligence into the public conversation. But here we go, we're talking about our ancestors back in the Stone Age maybe, or even before, like, our primate cousins, our Neanderthal ancestors. They would have evolved these emotions when they lived in a very, very different world from the world we live in today, right? So if I just read this quote to you, the mismatch problem, as is illustrated in this book that I haven't read, but read a lot of reviews. Modern humans must navigate an anonymous but densely populated, digitally dependent world with a brain molded starting millions of years ago in small hunter-gatherer groups composed of family and friends who roamed sparsely populated open grasslands. So, our brains are not really wired for this world we find ourselves in, right? I mean, even a generation ago, people were not spending the majority of their time in this digital jungle, constantly coming up against the opinions and thoughts of complete strangers. They would never have known what was happening in other parts of the world. They would know what was safe and what was dangerous in their immediate surroundings. But, our ancestors would have never known if there was a deadly pandemic sweeping the world. They would have never known what is the global economy, how is it going to affect me, right? So in a way, we do have these kind of Stone Age brains in a modern body. And I think understanding that is the first step to being compassionate with ourselves as well, to think like, yeah, you're a piece of equipment that evolved to keep me safe. Thank you. It's just that sometimes our brains overreact, right? So as I put it here, we're no longer living on the savannah, but we react the same way internally to a distressing news article as we would have to a lion running towards us. Now, we are facing maybe unprecedented challenges right now. So the thought of maybe, some of us are facing the very real possibility that we can lose our livelihoods, our income, our jobs, that we are worried not just about our own health, but our loved ones. This is maybe a lot more stress and anxiety than we used to, right? Because I don't want to speak for everyone here, of course, but a lot of us have had pretty privileged and safe and lucky lives when we compare to the majority of the world. And maybe the biggest stresses that we've had up until now don't compare to this massive, big world of uncertainty that lies ahead of us. So, it's definitely okay that we're feeling anxious right now, right? It's definitely, I don't want emotional intelligence to be another quick fix, because that's one of the problems I think these days, is that we're taught that we can expect an easy solution to everything. Like, oh, you're feeling bad, have this pill, or here's someone who you can just pay to solve it for you. Like, no, it's a hard journey. And as Josh Friedman, the founder of 6 Seconds, says, yeah, sure, like there are people who don't feel negative emotions. We call them sociopaths, right? We don't want to be that person who is happy watching the world burn. That's weird. It is normal that we feel these feelings, but just being in touch with what is really going on for us and why have we evolved to react in this way, I think is one of the important things. So we'll have a little look at a brain. You've probably seen this, theory or illustration of the 3 different brains. Now, it's not, again, like we said about the thinking and feeling brain before, it's not that we have these 3 brains nested together like Russian dolls, right? It's 3 parts of the brain that are very much interconnected and working together. But if we look at other animals, we're able to see this reptilian brain is what reptiles basically have. It's how they function, and this is the part that regulates all those things that you're not really consciously controlling. So heart rate and temperature, breathing. You can obviously regulate your breathing, but it will still happen when you're asleep, when you're not paying attention. So this is very much the oldest part of our brain. And then the limbic brain is the next one that joined the party, really. So in mammals, you can see, this emotional or feeling brain. So this part of you will respond to stimulus with a burst of adrenaline, or with, activating parasympathetic nervous system. And often, as I'm sure you've all experienced, this happens before our rational or thinking brain even has a chance to know what's going on. So the limbic brain is, again, what might be labeled as the elephant, the feeling brain, the emotional brain. The neocortex, the latest piece of equipment that we evolved. This is where we have, the language part of our brain, the rational, the thinking brain. So understanding how all of these parts work together I'm going to give you another picture of a brain. Okay, so don't worry, you don't need to go around memorizing all these different parts of the brain. I still sometimes forget what some parts are called after years of studying psychology. But basically, the amygdala is one of the main parts of the brain that's connected with emotions and emotional response. And yeah, if we just read what happens here, we talked a bit about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, right? So these are all parts of that sympathetic nervous system. So something happens, you see a spider, you see a lion running at you, you read a scary article, and this triggers that fight or flight response, pumping your body with a burst of adrenaline or epinephrine. It's actually the same thing, just different name, to respond to perceived dangers. So yes, so your heart starts to beat faster, your pulse rate and blood pressure increases, as we've said, right, and you get more alert. Parasympathetic, on the other hand, it's the brake, the one that's triggered by love and happiness and telling you that you're safe and getting your body to calm down. So the fight or flight or freeze response, I've mentioned this a lot and I'm sure you've heard of it, right? So danger is perceived and very quickly we react. So I'm sure you've all had a situation where maybe, you know, you thought back later on what actually happened there when I was in that dangerous situation and you don't really even remember it clearly. That's often because before we're even consciously aware of what's happening, our body, thanks to this reptilian brain, this amygdala, has already, you know, perceived what's going on and acted. So in a lot of cases, we might choose fight. You know, this could be seen when someone reacts really violently to something they perceive as danger. They just attack first, ask questions later. Yeah, there's a lot of examples of that happening in the world today, especially, you know, when we have easily available guns in some countries. Yeah. Flight means you run away. Freeze is the, you know, the latest one again to join the party, because the theorists later noticed like a lot of people don't do either of these. They just kind of completely freeze up and don't react. So this is kind of clear to see when it's a really specific clear danger, right? Like, so let's say you might have sometimes been walking past a person and they moved in a sudden, unexpected way. Before you knew it, you've jumped, like you've moved out of the way. You didn't even really consciously think about it, but your body was like, something's weird, and moved you out of the way. So this is kind of your fight or flight response kicking in. But what does it look like when there's this invisible, long-term, unclear danger, like the coronavirus, like the threat of, you know, borders being closed down or losing your job? How does this look on a more, you know, long-term sustained level? So I found, I've got this book I really love here. It's called Emotional Resiliency in the Era of Climate Change. But I find it really applicable to the current situation we're in as well. And in there they say, you know, ways you might not realize you're in the fight mode, but still things that might happen, maybe attacking people on social media, you know, posting angry, outraged posts. So I've certainly seen a lot of this the last few days on my Facebook, a lot of my friends getting really, really angry at how other people are behaving in the situation. And I think, you know, they're in that fight mode, they write the response and they post it before they've really thought about it. Pushing information on others. So that means, you know, you've read something about how the apocalypse is coming and you're like, you have to read this. And you're really, you know, wanting other people to feel the fear you're feeling, maybe. So when we're in this fight mode, we're also much more prone to black and white thinking. So putting people into categories of good or bad, really, really, you know, no room for debate. This is really dangerous because this is how things like extremism are able to take hold, right? When people are in that constant anxiety of, I'm in danger, I'm in survival mode, it's much, much easier to recruit people then into your cause, because they're not feeling relaxed and calm enough to see the world in more, gray terms. And of course, this can lead to actual violence or aggression. You might also find yourself in flight mode, which looks like running away from the situation mentally. So just avoiding, denying, refusing to engage with what's going on. This can also involve things like positive illusions, which nobody wants to admit, but it's that people usually predict their own future is going to be far rosier than other people's. So we kind of tell ourselves, well, I won't catch it, I'll be okay, I'm young, I'm healthy, my job will be safe. We just kind of tell ourselves these things rather than really face the threat, or this kind of bargaining and rationalizing our own behavior. So again, it's the people who go, well, me going outside doesn't really count right now, or me doing this thing, it's okay because we find some way to make it okay. So there's these kind of avoidance behaviors. Or we might freeze, and when we freeze, we can dissociate completely from how we're feeling. So it's almost this numb feeling where you feel nothing. It can be procrastination. It can be dwelling on like, well, what can I do? Will it really make a difference? And in this book, she talks about how we can see this level of procrastination from our world leaders on issues like cutting carbon emissions, that they're kicking the can down the road all the time. So yeah, when you see these fight, flight, freeze responses in a wider context than just how we react to an immediate threat that's here right now, when we think about how we're reacting to something more long-term, I don't know about you, but I kind of had that feeling of, oh yeah, that is me. So yeah, I wanted to think about how might this have shown up for you? How have you experienced this fight or flight or freeze response in yourself as a result of everything that's going on at the moment? And what is it that you've been struggling with the most? So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms again. I'll put you with the same people. So just for a few minutes, I want you to talk about that. So how have these kind of reactions showed up for you recently, if they have? And yeah, what is it that's been hardest for you right now during this situation? So let me put you back for 5 minutes or so into those rooms. Thank you. So I'm sure we've all got a lot of good examples that come to mind, right, of how this is playing out for us right now. And also, if you do, if you believe in it in an energetic, spiritual way or not, let's say panic is contagious, right? So we are seeing other people around us also behaving in this kind of panicky flight or fight way. So, either we can say we're picking up on that energy and feeling it too, or we can look at it also from the neuroscientific perspective and say, our mirror neurons are triggered because we're seeing other people panicking. So again, in a social situation, right, that sends a message to our sympathetic nervous system that there's a reason to panic, there's a reason to worry. And this is from studies of how children develop phobias. Very often they learn from their parents what is scary, what is dangerous. So unfortunately, if you have a phobia of something that's not very rational, if your child sees you freaking out about it, then it's pretty likely they're going to develop a fear of that thing as well. So, fear and anger, these things, they're also very contagious. So I think, we can really forgive ourselves for feeling like this right now, because, there's so much uncertainty. There's so much tension in the air, right? And yeah, so talking about this again, to give you another, I guess, piece of vocabulary to use when you talk about this, there's this idea of amygdala hijacking. So again, Daniel Goldman talks about this in his book, but basically in a normal everyday situation, there's a stimulus, like we saw a mouse or a news article, we are consciously aware of it, and then we decide what to do, right? We have a moment where we actually think, am I gonna react to this? Am I going to run away? But in amygdala hijacking, we don't have that luxury. We just react straight away. So, I talked about the person walking past you, they move suddenly in a way you didn't expect, and before you know it, you've jumped. Maybe even, when you pick up something and it's really hot, maybe before you've consciously realized what's happened, you've dropped it again. So, this basically is described as the quick and dirty reaction versus the careful, calculated response. So when things go through our conscious awareness, we have time to think, is this a real danger? Am I, do I really need to act right now? But our brain kind of takes the route of better safe than sorry. So sometimes our amygdala is like, I'm not even going to bother telling the conscious brain what's happening. I've detected a danger and I'm going to act. This is amygdala hijacking. It skips the normal route to your conscious brain and just straight away acts, which is kind of scary, right? When we think about how we like to imagine that we're completely in control of everything that happens to us. But I'm sure we've all had situations where, like I said, we react and then later we look back at it and we don't really know what's happening. So understanding that sometimes our amygdala thinks that it's better just to physically react than to even bother bringing something to our conscious awareness. Something I think really important to understand as well when we look at how other people behave sometimes. We can say, okay, maybe they've been hijacked. And what causes these kind of extreme reactions? I mean, sometimes, as we said, it's a clear stimulus, right? It can be something we've evolved, again, as humans to be afraid of. So fear of snakes and spiders are some of the most common fears, because again, our ancestors living out in the wild would have known these were dangerous things. But when it comes to having a strong reaction to something like this, something a little bit different is going on, right? Because inherently a computer screen is not dangerous. I mean, words on a page are not dangerous, but what causes the panic, right? It's it's the thoughts that happen between the stimulus and the response. So I put that here just as a reminder again of what I said. So the amygdala hijacking. And one of the reasons that we might get hijacked and skip straight to the reaction is because this other part of our brain, the hippocampus, it's my favorite named part of the brain. So often where we store memories, and in particular emotional memories, it recognizes a threat based on something that was previously dangerous to you. So, what I mean is maybe a particular thing was dangerous or caused you anxiety and fear even when you were a baby, and your brain has just learned that this thing is a threat. And one of the clearest illustrations of this is the case of little Albert. So anyone who's studied psychology will know this story of back in the day, before they really had ethics to do experiments. These experimenters had this little boy called Little Albert, and they gave him a little white mouse to play with. And every time he picked up the mouse, they banged these two metal poles behind his head and made him jump out of his skin. Yeah, really nice. So what happened was Little Albert developed a massive fear of the mouse. But not only that, his brain generalized or overgeneralized that to everything that was white and fluffy, including the beard of the experimenter. Although maybe he just knew this experimenter was like a person to stay away from. So, our brains sometimes overgeneralize. So let's say, if you had a bad experience of not having enough money in the past, especially maybe you grew up in a household where sometimes there was worry and anxiety about whether you'd have enough money, that can mean your brain is going into threat danger mode as soon as there's any thought of this happening again, right? If you've had a really bad experience of illness in the past or of worrying about a loved one being ill, then in your brain straight away, when there's a chance of that happening again, it's like trauma, right? You're like, oh, it's happening again. And so often we kind of go straight into this very primal survival mode. And as I said, it's not always what the actual danger is, it's thoughts generated by that danger, right? And this is, if anyone's heard of CBT as therapy, or I think a lot of different counseling modalities, it's recognizing what are the thoughts that are causing these emotions and reactions. And, you know, I'm going to say sometimes these thoughts are perfectly rational and, you know, pragmatic ways to look at the situation. But it can go something a bit like this, right? So you read a news story about someone who's lost their job, and then thoughts that start to happen in your head might go a bit something like this. The economy is going to hell, there's going to be a recession, I'm going to lose my job and become homeless, I'll starve to death, everything's going to go all Mad Max and I'll have to fight with my bare hands to stay alive. Maybe a bit extreme, but you know, if we really were able to decode what words our amygdala is using, could be something like this. And so the reaction is we feel that fight or flight or freeze, right? We feel overwhelmed and stressed and anxious. Even if we're not consciously thinking all of those thoughts, that's kind of the idea. So what do we do instead? Well, one of the things is just to try and step in there, right, between the stimulus and response, to catch ourselves going down those spirals of thoughts. Because even though it might be something in the outside world that triggers the initial emotion, we can feed that emotion by carrying on with these stories and these thoughts, right? So I can't stop myself from feeling fear, maybe when I see this news heading, but I can stop myself from reading 10 million more stories that say the same thing and then going, oh, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? So it's kind of catching ourselves and going, okay, wait, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Is this fear gonna actually be helpful right now? You know, and again, sometimes yes, sometimes the fear is helpful if it's gonna make you sit down and go, okay, so what can I do to prevent or to reduce the chance of this happening? But if you're just gonna kind of dwell in the fear and just let it keep going, then, you know, that's not a useful emotion for you, right? So it's catching yourself and really recognizing what are the thoughts going on there. So yeah, I'll remind you again how emotion comes from that motere, I don't know how to pronounce that, the impulse and the urge to move and to act. So, you know, what are the effects of chronic anxiety and stress when the danger's this uncertain, prolonged thing, and we're sitting at our laptops? You know, we're not moving, we're not basically completing the stress cycle by running or fighting. We're just sitting in one place. So here's another little scientific explanation from Harvard, but I'll read it to you again. So as the initial surge of epinephrine or adrenaline subsides, the hypothalamus then activates the next component of the stress response system. Long story short, if we talked about the sympathetic nervous system as the accelerator, the parasympathetic as the brake, then this second part of the stress cycle is like holding the gas pedal down, right? It's keeping this low level idling of the engine. So here they say a lot of people are not able to put the brakes on stress. They just kind of keep this low level background stress running all the time. That sounds familiar. And over a long period of time, that has a lot of negative effects on our body, right? So a lot of chronic stress can lead to a lot of health problems. And so, yeah, so what do we do? What do we do to make sure we're not just sitting there drowning ourselves in anxiety and news when, you know, when there are maybe real dangers out there? So going back to what we can do. So I asked you at the beginning, how many emotions can you name? I'm sure that if I gave you more time, you'd be able to name a lot of them. But the reason for that, as I said, was this idea of emotional granularity, right? So the more emotions we're able to recognize and name, the stronger our emotional vocabulary becomes, and this brings us more and more emotional intelligence. Now, in Lisa Feldman Barrett's book, The Secret Life of Emotions, really good, she argues that we don't really have these separate things called anger, fear, happiness. She said those are just convenient labels for different sets of reactions in our body. And your anger and my anger might feel different, right? I might feel when my heart is racing and my face is burning, I might feel that's anger. You might feel that and think, that's embarrassment. Like, we might have got slightly different ways of experiencing our emotions. And she says, there are different words in different languages for emotions that we don't have in English. And she's like, she even says, why not make up your own emotion words? If you have a feeling that you can't quite find the right word for, just give it a name. And this will help boost your emotional literacy, so that when you're feeling something, you can say, oh, I'm feeling, excitement, I'm feeling this. For me, I have a few emotions that I kind of named. One is like this feeling of being really full and gross and feeling guilty that I should be exercising or doing something productive. That was a feeling that used to hit me on most Sundays. So I named it shambles because I felt like a shambles. And now it somehow helped. I was able to be like, oh, I'm feeling shambles right now. Okay, usually actually exercising makes that go away, because I recognize it was a very physical feeling of, not moving. So here are a few emotions that you might not have thought of. So there's a lot of versions of this emotional wheel that you can see online. So just to get you started, right, in terms of breaking down emotions into smaller and smaller categories. So if you're able to say, okay, I'm feeling, let's say, skeptical, and I'm feeling a bit frustrated and also kind of bored, maybe a bit optimistic, rather than just, good, bad. The more you're able to narrow this down, then the better for developing your EQ. And then the next part is, understanding the different triggers for your different emotions, right? So we talked about all these things that might trigger a response in you. So whether that's, a certain word you see online. So maybe every time you see a word like pandemic or outbreak, that triggers some kind of primal thing in you. Maybe it's, maybe it's even certain colors. Maybe it's certain things that people say. It could just be seeing other people being angry or stressed triggers something in you. Or it can be, when you're having a certain chain of thoughts, it could be that anything connected to being abandoned or being poor or not being able to leave a certain area, like, triggers a certain feeling in you. So really being able to break these down, like, when I feel this, then I have this emotion. So just to remind ourselves, to be kind to ourselves, because our emotions are often not rational, right? They're a survival mechanism from the oldest part of our brain, and they're designed to keep us safe. So, if you're not happy with the emotions you're having, often we can kind of beat ourselves up, like, oh God, I'm feeling stressed again. Why am I so weak? Why am I so bad at self-care? Like, no, we thank our body for trying to keep us safe. And sometimes, like an overprotective guard dog, sometimes they get it wrong and they bite the postman, right? But like, you're trying to protect me, and thank you for that. Yeah, so remember, again, our brain often uses shortcuts to decide if something is dangerous or not, using the rule better safe than sorry. And again, right, sometimes that 1 or 2 seconds that we would spend deciding what to do could really be the difference between life and death in some situations. And also remember, emotions are contagious, right? So if we see other people panicking, it signals to us that it's time to panic. That's why you see these like big mobs of people panic buying things. And remember, we react based on perceived, not actual danger. So, that's why in the grounding meditation I started with, we tell ourselves right now at this second, I'm safe. And we think about what is the actual, chance that I'm in danger right now, tomorrow. Sure, we never know, right? But that uncertainty is a thing we have to kind of grapple with through our lives, and to at least remind our body that right now we are safe. And actually what I'm doing now, putting your hand on your chest, stroking your arm, things like this, they might seem a bit weird if you're not used to it, but they really send a message to your body that you're safe. If you get a person who you feel close to stroke your head as well, these will send those signals to us that we're safe right now. And briefly, I just want to talk about, the need for control. So there's loads and loads of studies that show that basically people are happier the more control and autonomy they feel they have over their lives, right? So when you completely take away all choice and autonomy from people, they become very depressed, they don't live as long, they just kind of lose the will to do anything. And so this need for control is a really important thing to understand in us. And if we think about how do we see that need for control play out in the world, well, here are a few examples. Hoarding, superstitions, right? Like, oh, if I do this, then I can get the outcome I want. Perfectionism, trying to micromanage. Anxiety, obsession, trying to be over-informed, like we can feel more in control the more we know, but that can mean we just end up reading more and more and more and more than we really need to. And all kinds of things like this. So trying to change other people's behavior as well, right? All those posts on social media trying to tell people what to do. Right now, excessive cleanliness is probably a good thing, but in general, I have people who try to control the germs that are coming towards them. And then finally, when people don't feel that they can control anything, they might fall into this listless depression, when they're just oh well, there's no point. So this is really hard to contend with, because if you think about how our society has taught us as individualistic Westerners that everything is within our control, that we can basically choose what we do with our lives, that we can control our destiny, that everything is up to us. This is actually sometimes a pretty dangerous message to give people, right? Because it's not always within our control. There's a lot of things that we can't control. And in the book I was also just reading, which is called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, it's a really, really detailed book about the stress response cycle. He says there, yeah, sure, studies show that people with a strong internal locus of control are happier, like people who believe that they control their own destiny. But these studies are usually done on privileged, pretty rich college students who maybe do have a lot more control. But when you look at the wider world, people who are very maybe poor, who don't have a lot of say in what happens to them, then giving them that message that you can control everything, that it's up to you if you're rich or poor and happy or unhappy, that's so much pressure on us as well. And sometimes we really have to take a deep breath and say, I don't know what's gonna happen. And that's scary, right? It's really scary. But this is a question to think about. What has life taught you about what is within your control and what isn't? So that's a question to maybe think about. But I don't want to keep you here for too long. So I'll send you that as a little task to think about later. And then, are we preparing or are we panicking? So to think about what is actually within our control. So I'll post this in the Facebook group after this, so you can try this. But this is a little list writing exercise that's sometimes helpful, is to really list down everything that you're actually worried about right now. and what you're worried might happen in the future. So naming each thing like really specifically, not just, oh, bad stuff's going to happen, but like, I'm worried about this exact thing. Separating what is something that could happen now and what's in the future, and then making a list of all the possible solutions that you can think of. So, you know, it might be that you actually can do some things now, you actually can prepare, and in that case the fear was pretty helpful, right? But when you see things that you absolutely can't control, then possible solutions are, what can I do to, you know, accept this need for this lack of being able to control the situation as well. So we talked as well about changing our mood, getting ourselves into a different type of mood. And I know that, like we've said, this can be quite hard, but generating more helpful emotions, well, you know, like I said, we're not talking about distracting or numbing or suppressing, but we're calling, if you imagine your emotions as these different characters, you're calling into action the most useful character for right now. So there's the example that before a big sports game, a lot of I guess footballers, they like psych themselves up, right? They get into this like angry place so that they'll have more adrenaline and more blood flowing so that they can more effectively do that. I mean, I don't know if doctors, when they have to deliver really bad news, if they deliberately get themselves into like a really somber mood because it's more socially appropriate and sensitive. So, you know, we are often able to bring these different characters into play. So how do we do that? Oh yeah, and just because an emotion feels unpleasant doesn't mean it's not serving you in some way. That's the important thing. Yeah, so firstly, we've got to really think more about the fact that emotions are physical things, right? And a lot of self-help, a lot of therapy, it focuses, I just realized how much I'm touching my face. So everybody, all right, I'm very, very sanitized and soaked up. It's all good. Yeah. So, you know, we've seen that emotions are largely physical, but we often focus on the brain and the mind, and we don't give our body the energy and the, what Lisa Feldman Barrett calls the body budget, to actually manage our emotions properly. So, you know, when we don't get enough sleep, we're generally less able to handle stress. Caffeine, bad fats, and sugar, sorry everyone, I know we all know that these are things we shouldn't do. These also reduce our ability physically to deal with our emotions and process. And at the same time, cardio, yoga, again, they help our body to regulate. So really, there's just no replacement for these things. Yeah, it's quite hard to go outside right now, I understand, right? Natural light and greenery as well, they do help. What can we do if we can't go outside? I've been making sure that I stand at my window for at least an hour a day, just letting the sun come through. And it's really cold outside, so it feels a lot warmer there with the sun just on my face. And there's a tree outside my window, and I just look at that tree. I've got a plant on my window ledge now that I'm trying to grow as well. Yeah, and she even says, you know, sometimes distraction can help depending on what you're trying to achieve. So really getting lost into a novel, doing something hands-on, craft-based, like knitting, sewing, painting. All of these things can really help. But of course, you know, I know that these can feel like a vicious cycle, because if you're stressed, you crave sugar more, it's harder to fall asleep, it's harder to motivate yourself to exercise. It's really pushing yourself to take that first step. There's one thing that I do, again, which it's like the oldest trick in the book, but there was that psychology experiment where they got people to put a pen in their mouth like this. And the other group apparently had to hold it like this. And the first group, their faces basically going into a smile, and when they rated their mood afterwards, this first group rated themselves as happier. So it sounds really simplistic and weird, but apparently just smiling tricks your brain into thinking you're happy and safe. Sometimes smiling, or for me, putting on some really cheesy music and dancing around a bit. Yeah, but that's not always the most helpful emotion, right? Sometimes we need others. Yeah, so there's also a lot of stuff about generating this parasympathetic nervous system, so to bring down the heart rate, to feel more grounded and safe. So yeah, finding a way to help others. It doesn't mean that you have to go out and volunteer, but finding some way to give back, be there for other people, even if you're just offering, to hold space and listen to somebody else. Sometimes that can really also help us and generate that sense of companionship and love. Really, it's still really important to maintain social connections. Yeah, even when we're physically distancing, we can definitely make time to have these social connections. Touch, like I said, is really important. So if you can't actually touch another person, like really this stroking your forearm, touching, not your face, maybe touching your chest, it's like stroking yourself and reassuring yourself that it's okay. Meditation and mindfulness, again, a lot of research into those. And yeah, this part as well, this is a big thing with 6 Seconds, which is the emotional intelligence network, but understanding why you want to generate different emotions, like what will that do for you, what's the effect that you want to have on the world. And sometimes that can connect us to a greater sense of purpose, like I want to manage my emotions better because I want to be a strong support for my family and friends, because I want to be a person in the world who can help support other people. That connects me to my purpose. Yeah, so if you all got the energy for it, I'm going to do another little meditation with you now, recalling the emotions that you want to bring into action. So let me put my glasses on. This is partly in my notes and partly in my mind, but this is something you can try at home whenever you want to bring an emotion into action. Okay, so I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to think of an emotion that you might want to call into action right now. So it could be joy, love, safety, but it could also be anger, it could be strength, resilience, power. It could be calm, serenity, kindness. I want your mind to drift back in time to the last time that you remember feeling this emotion. You might just have to go back a few days, weeks, months, years, all the way back to that experience. As your memory starts to come alive, I can't hear you, but describe out loud what you're seeing, what you're hearing. What are the sounds, sights, smells around you? See yourself there, fully living that feeling of calm or strength or resilience, fearlessness, whatever it is. And imagine yourself there and step into that experience again. Step into that version of you. Notice how that feeling feels in your body. Notice how that feeling feels in your mind. Notice the emotions that are present in you. Keeping your eyes closed, describe out loud to yourself what you're noticing now. What else would help you feel more of that emotion right now? Maybe you want to move your body into a different position. You might want to stand up. You might want to change the way you're sitting. Feel free, I can't see you, to really move yourself into a position that embodies that feeling that you want to step into. So stay connected to that feeling, feeling it once more in your body, in your mind, in your heart. Now allow the image of that memory, of that time to fade away, but continue to feel that feeling, slowly bringing it back with you into the present moment, into this place and time. Notice again that feeling as you feel once more the chair or the bed beneath you, as you hear the sounds of this room. Feel that emotion as you notice the rise and fall of your breath and the temperature of the air, and still remaining connected to this feeling. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. So does anyone want to share briefly whether that helped them at all and what emotion they were able to bring into the present moment?
Yeah, I can share if you want, Gwyneth.
Yeah, sure.
I just went for an emotion of, like feeling that power, that feeling, yes, I can do this. So I want to bring that, and I just imagine a situation when I felt it internally. I really felt that, oh, I can do this. This is amazing. I am in charge. I am blah blah blah. So yeah, this is useful, right? This is useful.
Yeah.
We're overwhelmed by negative emotions, just to get ourselves back into that power or peace or joy. I think that's useful.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Yeah, and I think it was you that taught me as well this practice of standing tall, right? And imagining this power through us and this wide force field around us as well. I found that very helpful as well, sometimes to feel like strong and confident. Yeah. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to share? All right. So, okay. So I'm gonna also give this not so uplifting message, which is, that we should hope that things are gonna get better, but we should also consider the possibility that things might get worse. And I know that's not the feel-good message people want, but in terms of our emotional intelligence, right, it's recognizing what is happening in our body that stops us from being willing to consider that. Because if we are able to get into a place of calm, rational, making that list on the previous page and go, okay, so what might happen? What do I need to do? We're going to be much, much more resilient to whatever comes than if we're just kind of blindly hoping that everything will be okay and that we're refusing to engage with the feelings that don't feel good. Yeah. And also just to, like I said, to be really compassionate with yourself, to thank your body for trying to keep you safe at this time. Yeah, so one of the other things I work with is called the work that reconnects, which I find a really, really powerful practice for connecting with our emotions about, unknown futures. Like, it's used a lot for climate collapse, but I think it can be really useful for the situation too. So they take people through this spiral of starting with gratitude, going into honoring our pain for the world, really engaging with that. And then after usually it's after people have really allowed themselves to feel that fear and that grief and that anger, that they're able to come out of the other side and to see with new eyes, you know, to see the situation differently, and then to go forth, like to look at what they can actually do now. So, you know, in all of this EQ stuff, I don't want to say that we should run away from and avoid these feelings. It's more like, you know, we let them come in the mindfulness way, and we let them do their thing, and we don't ignore them, and we thank them, and we maybe ask them what their message for us is, but then we don't keep feeding them with more and more thoughts. But yeah, okay, great. So then I just want to plug at the end here what I'm doing this month. I've been quarantined already for 10 days, so I was like, naturally I'm going to put together some kind of course. So what I've put together is this 30-day e-course starting from the 1st of April called Staying Grounded in Times of Crisis. And what this involves is an email every morning with a writing prompt, an exercise, a meditation, something to help us, you know, tap into that resilience, to that power that Elena was talking about. And then it also includes twice a week meeting here on Zoom and, you know, really sharing with each other how we're feeling, maybe going through a guided meditation as well. And for the first 5 people who sign up as well, they can have one coaching session with me one-on-one. So if anyone's interested in this, it's normally in British pounds, it's normally £200 for this course, but I'm just offering it for £30 because of this crazy situation that we're in. And that's something like 900 Czech crowns. So it's kind of £1 per day. So if anyone's interested in signing up to this, I would welcome you to join. You know, I'm going to put the link in the Facebook event for this afterwards. And yeah, if we have at least 10 people who sign up, then we can run it. And I think it'll be something really useful for all of us who are stuck at home right now. Trying to, you know, figure out this. So it's going to be a mix of this emotional intelligence stuff, but also bringing in things like the work that we connect, mindfulness practices, embodiment practices, you know, really everything we can do to be like these beautiful trees here. Yeah. So I hope that you've all found something useful from that. I know we've gone for 2 hours, which is a lot longer than I wanted to go, or I wanted to keep you here, but if it's been useful, then I'm glad. So, okay, if anyone feels like they want to unmute themselves and give any kind of last comments or questions before we wrap up, then this is the time to do that.
Just want to thank you, Gwyneth. This has been very valuable and interesting. I enjoyed the past 2 hours with all of you guys.
Thank you, Maria. Glad.
I also wanted to thank you, Gwyneth. It was really a cool evening. Thank you very much for sharing everything with us.
Great, thank you, thank you. I'm glad that it could be helpful. I know we lost a few people along the way. I think they were like, oh, this was longer than I thought, but that's okay. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. All right, great. So please check the Facebook event page after this, because I'm gonna put up some useful, you know, links, the exercise where you can write down, you know, what can I actually do right now, just little things like that, and a link to my 30-day course as well. And yeah, also if you go onto my website, I've also created a free ebook, which is a series of writing prompts as well, and you get that as a free download when you join my mailing list. So a bunch of nice things that I've been making this last few days. Great, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, this is, you know, the first time I've done this webinar, so I'm also feeling really happy now. Just to give you a little insight, I had all these notes, but I didn't actually look at them in the end, so that's great. So Yeah, thank you so much, and I hope this has, sparked your interest as well in emotional intelligence, or at least in getting to know yourself a bit better, connecting to yourself a bit better. Okay, so good night.
Thank you very much, Gwyneth.